And now, in studio, bringing his Midwest values from the Show Me State to the land of San Diego. He's a triple threat, licensed as an attorney, mortgage broker, and a top producing realtor who's crushing the competition. Here to deliver you what's happening in the trenches of the market. Your host, Michael Gaddis.
Some interesting information on the CFPB and the reverse mortgages, but before I go there, I want to continue a little bit about Memorial Day and some other things that you really should think about. Okay, a few years ago, probably 5 years ago, I went to Hawaii, and I had the pleasure of going to Pearl Harbor. Now, when I was in 5th grade, I was obsessed with World War II, and specifically Pearl Harbor. At one time, I could tell you every single ship that was in Pearl Harbor, where they were. I knew everything about it. I don't know why I was obsessed with this, but I was completely obsessed with it. So when I took a trip to Hawaii, one of the things I had to do was I had to go to Pearl Harbor. And I had to see two things. One, I had to see the USS Arizona, and the other thing I had to see is the Missouri, because obviously I'm from Missouri, and that ship has a lot of historical significance. So I brought my son at the time, who was 5 years old, to see Pearl Harbor. To go to Pearl Harbor. Now, before you go over to the memorial, the actual memorial, you have to take a little boat, a little dinghy boat, and you go over and you have to get off on the little memorial they built. You have to watch a movie. Now, my son at the time was 5, and I didn't really think much about it. The movie's kind of black; it's a black and white movie, and it just kind of tells you the history, what happened, what brought up to it. Well, I was watching the movie, which lasts about 10 minutes, I think, 10, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden I look down, and my son is crying. And I was like, "What's wrong, Aiden?" His name's Aiden. I said, "Why, Aiden, why are you crying?" And he looked up at me, he goes, "All those young men, they died. They died." And I was like, "Yeah, they died." And he goes, "I don't understand." And I didn't know how to address this, because I didn't think a 5-year-old would even pay attention to it. I thought he was going to be just like, "Okay, let's move on to the next thing." But he was really enthralled with what had happened, and he got really angry with the Japanese in the film. And so he says, "It's the Japanese fault." And I said, "Well, son, those Japanese are not the same Japanese that are here today." I said, "That was a completely different group of people, and believe me, I don't think any of those guys are around." And I said, "So the Japanese that are here now are our allies." But, at the time when he watches the movie, he's, of course, upset with them. So, I told him, "Hey, look, you got to look at people differently. You can't blame them for what happened before." So we get on the boat to go across to the memorial, and when you get off the Pearl Harbor Memorial, there's this platform, and in the back of the memorial, there's this little enclosure, and on the wall are the names of everyone who died there. So my son, I started taking him around. We went and we looked down at the Arizona. You can still see oil bubbling up from it. I know I heard stories about that. You can. The oil still bubbles up from that. So, we walked over towards the back room over there, and my son, Aiden, would not go in the room. And I said, "Why don't you want to go in the room?" And he says, "I'm not going in there." And I said, "Well, why?" And he goes, "Because all of those names represent one of those men that died." And he goes, "I don't want to see it." And so he refused to go into that room. And, for me, that moment has always kind of stuck with me, not just because I had the pleasure of going to one of the places that are a bucket list on my things to do in my life, but because of my son's reaction to what was there. At that point in time, he detested war. He even told me, he goes, "War is stupid." And I said, "It is. It is." And then he started asking me some very complicated questions, like, why does it happen? Why do people go to war? It doesn't make sense. Why do people die? Don't those people have mommies and daddies? He started asking me all these questions, and I didn't know how to answer it. And so, I kind of calmed him down a little bit, and then we went over, and right next to the Arizona, or facing the Arizona, is the USS Missouri. Now, for all of you who do not know the significance of the Missouri is where the Japanese surrendered during World War II. They were on the deck of the ship. They signed the surrender paperwork on the ship. And if you go on the USS Missouri, there's a little plaque right at the very spot where that was signed. And if you look in your history books, you'll see, everyone at this table signing it on the USS Missouri. And when you go to the bow of the ship of the USS Missouri and you look forward, what do you see? You see the Arizona Memorial. So what you see when you're there, is the beginning and the end of the war. The beginning started with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and it ended with the Japanese surrendering of the USS Missouri. And both of them are there in Pearl Harbor so that we can remember what happened. Now, we all have heard that speech from President Roosevelt. I'm sorry, during after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, where he says Pearl Harbor is a day that will live in infamy. And when I was growing up, every time that date comes around, I remember it. But it's amazing how many people don't remember it anymore. And I think that what's sad about that is it was one of the most horrific things that have ever happened to the United States. But time is one of those things that causes people to forget, and they should never forget. You should never forget that day, what happened that day, because that is the day that basically caused the dominoes to start falling. That's the day that we basically said enough. And it's one of those things like even the Twin Towers. As we get more distance between us and the time of it happened, people's memories start to fade. And I don't think that that's a good thing. I think people should remember those and really should try to be conscious of the fact that these events happened and how America stood strong when those things happened. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because that and the Normandy beaches I talked about in my first segment are two of the they're pivotal points in American history, especially the history of World War II. But World War II was very pivotal because it's what created us as a national power, the United States. Out of World War II, the United States was effectively born as a world power because we were kind of in an isolationist mode before that. We didn't want any part of international affairs, things like we tried our best to stay out of it. But World War II is what started us. And it really, really catapulted us to the top of the food chain, so to speak, in global matters. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because it is one of those things one of those days in history that it should, every time that date comes around in December, everyone should, take a moment to just remember it. I mean, it should be one of those days where all the flags are flown half-mast. Everything, it should never stop. It should live in infamy. People should always remember what happened that day. So anyway, a little bit about, we're going to move on to our topic now. I want to talk a little bit about reverse mortgages. I was reading an article the other day about CFPB, that's the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. They had an article, they have actually several articles on it, about deceptive advertising for reverse mortgages. So I was kind of curious. I was like, well, how could somebody be deceptive in reverse mortgages? And it was interesting what I found out. When I read the article, apparently people solicit to the seniors, and they basically, their advertisements basically look like that's from the government. They use government seals, FHA seals. They use it looks like an official document. And so they send these documents to seniors, and the seniors believe, one, it's coming from a government entity, and two, that what they're saying in there is a benefit of the government entity. Now, reverse mortgages are not a benefit, but they are as a loan. It's an insured loan. So it's important for people to remember that, be careful when you get mailing. And this goes to whatever you're doing. I mean, whether you're trying to refinance your loan, no matter what it is you're doing, people are always trying to bait you to contact them so that they can try to sell you. They're trying to elicit a reaction from you. And they're always trying to do it in ways that basically are the most effective. But you got to be careful because the same thing happens with loan modifications. People were at one time were advertising by sending out flyers or documents that looked like they were either coming from state government agencies or they were coming from their lender themselves. So people were opening up, they were calling. It's a kind of a dirty way to get people to call you. But in that business, people are just trying to shake the tree and hopes anybody calls. So my advice is be careful on what you see and question things. And if it looks like it's from a government entity, question whether it is. Now, I don't think you're going to see very much of that anymore because that particular company was fined a substantial fine for doing that. But I mean, that's pretty audacious to start using the logos of the government in your advertising purposes and trying to make people believe that it comes from you. So the things they were telling you is that people don't realize that that it is a loan. They think it's a benefit. They're trying to advertise as a benefit of the government. And basically what it is, it's an insured loan, which is a good thing, but you have to understand what it is. You need to be 100% out there and be, fully understand what it is you're getting when you're getting it. The other thing they said that was deceptive is that they were saying that people receive benefits until they die. Now, the benefit you get until you die in a reverse mortgage is that you get to occupy the property until you die. Now, there are two types of programs people can get. They can either get term or tenure, and that's not 10-year, that's tenure, but I'm from Missouri, so I have that little bit of an accent. Tenure payment. Now, tenure payments are supposedly set so that you can receive cash distributions from the equity of your home during your expected lifespan. However, if you outlive your basically your benefits, you could the payment to the tenure payment could stop, and the term payment is a payment that's set for a defined period of time. So, the purpose of this of me talking about this is just to kind of give you guys some heads up that basically when you get advertisements in the mail, don't just basically blindly believe that they are what they are. Realize that people are always trying to elicit a response from you, and just basically question it. And if you have a question, either call them or call somebody who you trust to say, hey, look, does this look like a solicitation, or does this look like it's legitimate? As I mentioned, and when it comes to loan modifications, they were falling out of the woodwork. People were calling me constantly going, is this legitimate or is this a solicitation? And there are ways I can show people how very easily to identify things as solicitations. But if I didn't know it was a solicitation, I could see why people would definitely be confused. So anyway, I just wanted to end with that. After the break, we're going to talk